While not currently in Open Doors' top 50 most dangerous places to be a follower of Jesus, the territory known as the Palestinian Authority, under the Palestinian Authority in the Westbank and in Gaza, traditionally known also as Judea and Samaria, at least in regard to the West Bank, still falls within the top 60 most dangerous places to be a Christian. But actually, when we look at the statistics, we can surmise that this is not because of the absence of persecution there, but because of the increased erosion of Christian freedoms, the silence of many who are there that has been forced, and the complete, almost erasure of open Christianity in the West Bank and in Gaza. Joining me this evening, as usual, is my good friend and co-host Alistair Scott, as we ask the question, do the Palestinian Authorities aid Christian freedoms? Good evening, Alistair.
Good evening. It's great to be here again, and a really important situation that we're looking at, particularly in this area, which has been part of the topics on news programs for the last few months, with everything that's going on around Israel, with the war with the Hamas and Hezbollah in the north. We've looked more specifically at Hezbollah when we've done Lebanon in the past, but this program is again really focusing in on that Gaza area. And it was back in January, I think, when we looked at the whole situation, just comparing the difference between Israel and an area like Gaza, where there was such a freedom for religion to be practiced, no matter which part of faith you belong to. But in these Hamas-controlled or terrorist-controlled areas, basically Christianity has come down to next to nothing, isn't it? The percentage of Christians is very low. So
yeah, it's important that we discuss as in relation to the previous program that you mentioned, we were dealing with that claim that Israel is systematically destroying Christianity across the Middle East, that some people like Calvin Robinson and Candace Owens have espoused and other individuals have picked up on, and it just doesn't hold weight when you analyze across the Middle East. The primary driver of persecution is Islamic oppression. And even you could even consider that in Israel. There's villages, Arab villages, primarily Muslim villages. The primary drivers of the persecution in those areas are, of course, going to be individuals who are resisting the leaving of Islam by those people who are coming to faith in Christ. There are extreme contingents we talked about in that program of Israelis. Extreme Orthodox Jews have done certain things, vandalizing cemeteries and whatnot at times. That's the reality. But constitutionally, there is freedom, and practically, there is also freedom to be a Christian and to share the love of Jesus. Not so in and around Gaza and the Palestinian Authority region. We have, if you consider just what we're talking about in regard to the West Bank, because there can be some confusion, and it's at the best of times difficult and complicated. You have three zones of what is called the West Bank. 60% is actually under Israeli control. Right? The remaining 40 is overseen by and has essentially control up by the Palestinian Authority, that whole region of historic Judea and Samaria, and it is ruled by Fatah. So in Gaza, you have, simplifying, Hamas is in charge, and you have over in the West Bank area that's has Ramallah as its de facto capital. That is Fatah, its rival group, which was overthrown in a bloody coup by Hamas in Gaza back in 2007. There was a war lasting about 10 days. Incredibly brutal treatment of those Fatah members who, of course, lost to Hamas eventually. It became, after the fact, a hotbed of extremism, a hotbed of terror, and the anti-Israel agenda of Hamas, the anti-Jewish agenda of Hamas, and the anti-Christian agenda of Hamas was all too apparent. Now, since that time, we've seen a steady decrease. If you consider, here's some of the demographics. Between 2014 and 2021, the population of the Gaza Strip increased from 1.8 million to 2 million, according to U.S. Government estimates. However, the population of Christians decreased over the same period due to the extremely high levels of immigration and declining birth rates, as well the high levels of immigration mostly being steered by extreme persecution. There are now somewhere in the region of 1,000 to 1,300 professing Christians in Gaza, down from an estimated 3,000 prior to 2007. It was still very, very low. A 2014 survey by the YMCA suggests that 89% of the Christian population there are a kind of traditional church background of Greek Orthodox, mostly, while 9.3% are Roman Catholic, and 1.52% are Baptist or other evangelical. Right? But what's interesting is those groups have seen themselves obliterated in many ways. The Baptist Church in Gaza, for instance, Hamas set up shop in its upper floor. The Christian bookshop that was very close to that. Its owner was repeatedly harassed. The bookshop was burned and torched on a couple of occasions before the owner was murdered. And before the shop was completely bombed out by Hamas.
I remember the story. I think we might have even touched on it when we were doing the program in Israel, because I met one of the two partners who were, I mean partners as working together, who were running the Bible Society in the Gaza Strip. And because he came to one of our faith camps as a speaker, and I met with him personally, and he was telling about the persecution and the threats that was coming against him and his workers. And eventually, as you say, his partner, his second, was murdered. And very soon after that, the Bible Society had to close its office down, or its center down, and move back into Israel, because the threats to life, were great. And they'd seen what had happened with the getting rid of Fatah. And it was extreme. I mean, you talk about
dragging bodies behind motorbikes,
and there were those pictures which were actually filmed of people being thrown off the top of high-rise apartments, and these are supposedly their own Islamic believers, maybe don't have the same ideology as them. So it was pretty brutal. And even the figures that we're giving now, that there are a few of the Christians still remaining, they are living in very, very dangerous situations, and no doubt would probably need to come out unless Israel takes over control of the Gaza Strip again.
In a report by Eddie Cohen of the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies at the Bar-Ilan University, the persecution of Christians in the Palestinian Authority, Cohen warns that the ongoing international neglect of the plight of the Christians under the Palestinian Authority rule could lead to the disappearance of Christianity in the place where it emerged. And he hones in on a couple of incidents, primary major scale incidents in the Westbank area. On April 25th of 2019, terrified residents of the Christian village of Jifna near Ramallah asked the PA to protect them after they were attacked by Islamic gunmen. The violence erupted after a woman from the village submitted a complaint to the police that the son of a prominent Fatah-affiliated leader had attacked her family. In response, dozens of Fatah gunmen came to the village, fired hundreds of bullets in the air, threw petrol bombs while shouting curses, and caused severe damage to public property. It was a miracle that there were no dead or wounded. Despite the residents' cries for help, the PA police did not intervene during the hours of mayhem that ensued. No suspects were arrested. The rioters called on the residents to pay jizya, a head tax that is taught in Islam. It's been taught throughout history in Islamic nations for non-Muslim minorities under Islamic rule. So they were trying to extort money from these individuals because they identify as Christians. The most recent victims, of course, well known of jizya, were Christian communities in Iraq and Syria under ISIS. And so this shows, people will talk about Hamas and then they'll say, yeah, but the Palestinian Authorities not the same. And that's true, they're arch rivals, but then people will jump to say, well, Fatah is moderate. This is moderation. Extreme actions being taken against Christians, imposing Islamic taxes.
Exactly, moderation is a relevant thing. What is moderation when the Christian communities are feeling threatened? I mean, as we've just read that report, gunshots, firebombs being thrown at properties. I mean, how secure can you feel in that situation when the police who are being called out don't come out? I mean, I've seen the same in other Islamic nations, and you have too. I mean, the same thing happens in Pakistan in Christian communities. They call for police protection, the police just stand and watch as schools and churches are burnt down. And so, again, it's one of those situations, how important it is for us to pray for those few remaining Christians in what we call Judea and Samaria, which others refer to in the world as the Westbank, that they remain strong and protected, because they're not being protected by the forces, the security systems that are there. So they need supernatural help and protection and our prayers. And
we see following that event, there were further elements of unrest targeting Christians. In May of 2019, also vandals broke into a church of the Maronite community in the center of Bethlehem, and Eddie Cohen outlines how they desecrated it. They stole expensive equipment belonging to the church. They then turned their attentions to an Anglican church in a village of Aboud, west of Ramallah. Vandals cutting through the fence, breaking the windows of the church, desecrating the church, looking for valuable items and stealing their equipment. No suspects were arrested at all. And that was the 6th time at that point that the Maronite Church in Bethlehem had been subject to vandalism and theft. An arson attack in 2015 had caused considerable damage and forced the church to close for a lengthy period. And then even though Muhammad Abbas himself, the leader of the PA, was present on December 24th, the party to recognize the church's reopening and renovation, the arson, in addition to acts of rioting and vandalism, over the years, there was no coverage of this in the Palestinian media. In fact, there's a gag order on any conversation to do with this sort of persecution. Fatah regularly exerting heavy pressure on Christians in that region not to report acts of violence, not to report vandalism, not to report these elements of their life which they are frequently oppressed by, as it could damage the PA's image in the Western world and could reflect negatively. So that they don't want to be portrayed as a radical entity. They still want to kind of look as if they're more moderate as opposed to Hamas, but the reality says otherwise.
Well, I mean, personally, I have experience because of that. I'm on the board of Joseph Storehouse, which is part of Vision for Israel, and every Christmas and also at the start of the school years, we send teams in to take gifts for the children and help the few remaining churches that are practicing their faith, and particularly they are faith-filled believers, and we can film them rejoicing and receiving their backpacks for school when it's the start of a new term, and their
presents. My nieces and nephew, by the way, received some of those backpacks.
Oh, really?
So it's a real blessing.
So we're both connected. But the reason I'm talking about this is everything looks good on camera, and I'm really pleased that we're able to go and help in a way. But when you speak to them privately, then they will talk about what's really happening, because they are, even if we've got our own film crew filming, there are also those from the PA who are watching over and will not allow you to speak certain things out. So when you get into the private time over lunch or over a cup of coffee, and when the cameras are not rolling, then you find out what persecution really is. And that's why, you know, those facts, we were at the recent launch, weren't we, of the church, the most dangerous places to live as a Christian. And certain these nations don't get a mention because it's so controlled.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to give reports that are going to make them look not as moderate as they claim to be.
And that's what they said specifically at that event, that the absence of some nations from the list is not because persecution is not happening or there's not oppression. It's that the Christians who are there are not willing to give reports, or they're so suppressed that they cannot, in effect, be easily identified.
And the persecution doesn't exist as much as it is because there are hardly any Christians left. They're having to leave for their own safety and to be able to practice their faith. So it's a kind of mixed up situation, but they need our prayer. I tell you, I know that from personal conversations I've had with leaders in the area, and they're great. Those pastors and leaders, they are so committed to their flock, but they need a lot of prayer and heavenly divine support and covering.
I visited Ramallah last year, and it was jarring to see the open propaganda from Hamas and the extreme amount of praise and heroizing of terrorists in various murals throughout the city. It's the only place that I've visited where the obvious church was a Catholic church, because the others are basically underground, was completely closed. It's the only town, city, village I visited where I could not find any way to access the Catholic Church building. And, you know, the security concerns are very, very real, a massive struggle there. In December of 2024, the Institute for Contemporary Affairs, founded jointly with the Veschler Family Foundation, reported that the Christian population living under the Palestinian Authority and Hamas rule has steeply declined. They outline a few areas, including systematic employment discrimination, forcing people to leave their communities to seek opportunities elsewhere. That's included in driving this mass exodus. By 2017, despite Bethlehem and surrounding villages being 86% identifying as Christian in 1950, now that's dwindled to less than 10%. We have in 2022 a study indicating that there was a strong desire among Gaza's Christian population as well to immigrate. And so where possible, there are many people, both in the Westbank and in Gaza, who are taking that opportunity to immigrate and to leave.
Well, totally understandable, isn't it? They're living in really death situations, or certainly threat of death situations, and of course they want to practice their faith, and they want to be able to be outgoing and be, you know, obeying the Great Commission, but they're living in an area where it's under so much stress. I was thinking again about the Christmas time. You know, the only time where they open up Bethlehem is over Christmas, because, you know, the birth of Jesus and so on, and it's because it's a big money spinner for the PA at that time, because, you know, the Christians want to come in and visit the site, and it's not so easy to do anymore because there's a lot of security to get in there, but it makes money for the organization. But the threats that will be going on to those believers who are trying to live there and trying to stand in their faith is horrendously difficult.
In April 2022, an evangelical pastor, Johnny Shawan, was arrested by the PA on charges of promoting normalization with Israel. PA security forces did nothing to counter this in any way. And this just shows that if you speak up in favor of Israel as a Christian in the West Bank or in Gaza, you're taking your life into your hands. And this is a problem that many have when they recognize, though they recognize the extreme difficulties that they're under as a direct result of the Palestinian Authority, they're either coerced into singing the same soon as the Palestinian Authority, or they just have to be quiet. In October 2022, an unidentified gunman shot at the Christian-owned Bethlehem Hotel after a video on social media associated the hotel with a display which happened to include shocking cardboard cutouts of a Star of David and a menorah. So social media video, Bethlehem Hotel, something to do with a cardboard cutout of a menorah and Star of David incites a terrorist to go and shoot the place up.
Yeah, and this is what we're talking about as being moderate Islam.
No arrest made.
No, absolutely. Yeah. It's anything but, and they are totally anti-Christian, of course, but they're also absolutely anti-Jewish in the area. So the battles that go on, the settlers who are living in what we call Judea and Samaria, it's not an easy life for even the Jewish people, but for the Christians, they keep their faith going, and they continue to be, as it says in Ephesians 6 verse 10, strong in the Lord and the power of his might. But they must be so intimidated all the time, you know, there's no doubt about it.
But this is, in addition to this type of persecution we've been talking about, which is personal and there's no response or arrest, there's pressure to not report, and there's this institutional persecution committed by the Palestinian Authority police against Christians. One member of Protestant clergy under the PA explained Christians feel unprotected due to the failure of the police to intervene on their behalf in confrontations with Muslims. When subjected to harassment and worse by Muslim extremists, Palestinian Christians usually opt not to report incidents to the police. And according to another clergyman of Protestant background, many are too scared to discuss their accounts, feeling it is dangerous since it may provoke further persecution, as the PA police are viewed as hostile. There's another story of one lady, Sana Razi Nashash from Beit Jala, being harassed by a man in the street. There's a lot of issues with sexual harassment as well. And this is known, this is recognized. I even was having a conversation outside of Barclays with a raging protester on a recent occasion and said, okay, so you're saying all of these things. Tell me, what about this? You know, you're talking about freedom, and I brought these particular cases up. And it's recognized, this exists. That's a separate issue. That has to be dealt with separately. But it doesn't, because it's part and part of the culture. Yeah. This lady was on her way to file a complaint with the police. She then saw the perpetrator, the sexual harasser, wearing a PA police uniform. Needless to say, she didn't bother filing the complaint. Now, that was not a direct attack on her for being a Christian as such, but it just shows that there's this sort of double-edged sword. If a crime happens and you happen to also be a Christian, then you are increasingly of the mind and feeling that you're not going to be taken seriously, or so they're facing significant bias when seeking justice in local courts, and a lot of discrimination within the legal system as well.
Well, I mean, it's part of the Islamic culture, ideology, that the women are treated as second-class citizens anyway. So as a Christian woman, you have no chance, really, other than the hope that you have in Christ. And of course, God will protect those believers in there, and he will give them the wisdom, and you know how important it is for those who are continuing to practice their faith to hear the voice of God, because there can be a time where God says, okay, for your own safety, come out of the place, but as women, they're going to have no chance, as you saw what you just shared, you know, that the one who was a perpetrator was the next day walking around as a policeman.
Exactly.
So who do you report to? Because that's the way of the land, that's the way of the people, that's the ideology behind Islam anyway. And those in power, they have absolute power, so they don't have to show any favor towards a Christian or a woman of their own faith. So it's a very tough one.
The PA's ineffectiveness or unwillingness to address this abuse as well has also, somewhat unsurprisingly, led to a significant increase in pervasive sexual harassment and rape. The studies and reports indicate this. One individual reports, as Hannah Musla, a 23-year-old Palestinian Christian teacher in Beit Sahor, stated in a rare 2002 interviews, going back some time, but it's relevant, that the public harassment, this sort of issue that we're talking about, that continues to this day, began when the PA came to power. After 1993 is when that occurred. Okay, but before, this is a quote from an Arab Christian in that area, before there were no things like this. Originally, we could go to every place we wanted. We could walk in the streets, but now I do not walk alone on the street because of this bad thing. So I prefer to walk with my brother, my mother, or my father. In Gaza, Christian women have been routinely abducted or pressured into converting to Islam and marrying Muslim men.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we're hearing now even more and more of the stories of the hostages that have been released out from Hamas down there in the south. How they've been mistreated, abused, literally, and it's happening on a day-to-day basis within the Christian communities as well, where they can get away with. And as you say, they are being harassed to convert to Islam, and they have to be very strong to keep their faith going. So it's never an easy place to be, but you really do need to be called as a missionary or as a minister to work in those areas. You have to be so determined to serve the Lord. And as I said earlier, we pray that they continue to hear the voice of God directing their steps. You know, that wonderful scripture in Proverbs chapter 3 verse 6 says, acknowledge him in all your ways and he will direct your steps. So we really have to pray for that hearing ear and that discerning spirit to be operating amongst our brothers and sisters in these difficult areas.
Absolutely, and to recognize that this is an ongoing issue that we have to be active in praying into. There's also land grabs. There's one story in Bethlehem. A Muslim family from Hebron took possession of the Christian Kamtsia family's land and built a business center atop it without permission. And the judge reversed the decision of a previous court to reward the Kamtsia family their land. It's just routine legal discrimination, sexual discrimination, religious assault. We need to be praying for our brothers and sisters.
I mean, the stories are so many, but the main thing we need to know is we can't cover them all today. But you, wherever you are watching this program, please pray for our Christian brothers and sisters who are being harassed and persecuted in this nation.